So if you remember, the last time we created our database, the person database, and we created one table, and then we installed entity framework. If we look here in dependencies packages, we have installed those 3 different packages that allowed us to use a command, which is the scaffold command, that we passed the connection string of this database, and it took a look at our tables and it auto-generated them into entities. So this is one entity, for example. It auto-generated each table into a code that we can use, and it also generated this PersonDB context class that we have used in our controllers and our APIs, if you remember. So here, for example, to get all people, we have created a new instance of that database class, and we have retrieved the records from the DB person table, which we have here. We could do that because we have installed entity framework, which mapped everything together. Today's topic is very interesting. We're going to be layering our application correctly. We're going to separate the business logic from the controller, from the data access layer. So we're going to have 3 different projects in this one big solution. So basically the controller will be calling, each API in the controller will be calling a function from our business logic layer, and the business logic layer functions will be calling functions from the data access layer, where the data will be accessed and changed, updated, posted. You'll understand what I mean in a second. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rename this web application project to Web API. So let's do that. And the second thing I want to do is right click on this solution, then go to add a new project, select class library, you can search it here, and the first class library we're going to call business logic layer. And now let's create, and now we need to create a third project. So add new project, data access layer. Now in our business logic layer, I'm gonna call this class PersonBLL. BLL stands for business logic layer. Now let's press yes. It automatically changed this class name. And in our data access layer, let's call this class 1.cs. Let's rename it to PersonDAL. DAL stands for data access layer. Okay. Now if we take a look here, we can see that we have a PersonController, PersonDAL, and PersonBLL. So each table has 3 different classes, each in a project. Now let's go back to our controller here. Let's take this one, for example. I'm going to take this function that returns a list of people, so all records of people in our database. If you remember, we tested using Postman last time. So here, if we run that, let's call this. As you can see, it has returned everything just like we did last time. Today we're gonna see the same output, but we're gonna work in a way better practice, so stay tuned. So again, let's take that, go to our business logic layer. I'm gonna close this one, I'm gonna close this one, and here let's create the same function. And of course we're gonna fix everything, and we're gonna explain the importance of that and the role of this class. And here I'm gonna do the same for now. Let me copy that and paste it here. So if you take a look at the data access layer, the role of this class is to access the data, to access the source from which we're getting our data. So whether it's a Microsoft SQL server, whether it's MongoDB, it doesn't matter. It can even be a file or an Excel file. So the data access role is to access the database, basically, and retrieve the data. It should not really contain business logic or business rules. the business rules should be implemented in the business logic layer in here, which we're going to change now. So this is not working now because we don't really know, we cannot really find the person, since we don't really have a reference from Web API, and we should not have that reference. The only references that we should have is from Web API, and let's add the references now since we're talking about that. So in dependencies in our Web API project, right click, add project reference, and we only need to check the business logic layer. Why? We already said why, because our APIs here will be calling our business logic layer, and we also said that the business logic layer should be calling the data access layer function, and that's why we need to go to business logic layer folder, right click on dependencies, add project reference, and only reference the data access layer. Let's press on OK, and if you realize, data access layer does not reference anything, and it should stay this way because our data access layer should not depend on anything. It should not depend on the controller, it should not be depending on the services. So if you think about it, this project here is reusable. We can reuse it in different projects, and we could say the same about the business logic. Now here I'm gonna delete that because that's not what we're gonna be returning, and here, since our PersonDB context is directly related to the data access layer, we need to take that as well as this entity that was auto-generated from entity framework. So basically this whole repository folder, let's take it from here and go to data access layer and paste it there. So now we have it here. Now if we try to run this project, you will realize that there are errors, which is normal because if you take a look here, we have installed entity framework in our Web API project, but what we actually need to do is install it in our data access layer, where we're actually using our database, where we're accessing our database. So instead of having them here, we need to have them in our data access layer. So in our data access layer, right click, manage NuGet packages, and we need to install those 3 packages again, but this time in our data access layer. So here let's do that. Entity framework core. Again, I'm using .NET Core 3.1, so this one is not compatible. I'm gonna go and pick the correct one, install. Okay, I accept. Then we need to install entity framework tools, just like we did last time. Microsoft.entity framework.core tools. Again, pick the version that you're actually using, your .NET version. Mine is 3.1. And we still have one to install, which is SQL. This one, Microsoft.entity framework core.sql server. Install. Okay, I accept. Now if you take a look here, we no longer have any error because everything we depend on is actually installed in our packages. And here in our Web API, we no longer need those packages, so I'm gonna remove them. Again, the controller should not depend on the data access layer. So here, the controller doesn't know that we're using SQL. It doesn't know if we're using MongoDB, and it should not know because that's not its primary role. So you're gonna see how we're gonna change that and modify it. Now remember what we did earlier. We came here in our Web API, we added this reference, business logic layer. So now we can use any class inside of our business logic layer. We're going to be using this one and calling this function. So here, let's create a constructor, public PersonController. That's our constructor. And here I'm going to add a member. It's gonna be private. It's gonna be type data access layer dot person DAL. Let's call it DAL. So, excuse me, this should be business logic layer, and this should be PersonBLL. So this is from this project, this logic layer, and this is the class that we're going to be using in this controller. So this is going to be BLL, and now we need to create an instance. So BLL equal new business logic layer dot PersonBLL. Now here, instead of actually opening a connection or creating an instance to the database and retrieving the data in our controller, we should instead be calling our BLL function, so BLL dot get all persons. Let's go to our BLL. Here we have an error because we have not used the system.collection.generic for our list, and we have not used the models folder. Now also notice that in our data access layer we had previously called this models in our scaffold command. This was the destination, but it's better to call it entities instead, and I'm gonna explain why. And here don't forget to change the namespace to dot entities instead of models, because this is an entity and not a model. I'm gonna explain the difference now. Basically they are both classes, they are both going to contain the same properties, but the difference is that the data access layer only works with entities and the controller only works with models. So the user here should only get models, it should not get the entities. You might be asking yourself why. I'm going to explain that in 2 minutes, so stay tuned. Meanwhile, what I'm going to do is go to my business logic layer, and just like we did in our controller, we need to create a private member, which is going to be from the data access layer this time. And again, we are able to do that because in our dependencies we reference data access layer in our business logic layer project. So here dot person DAL. Now let's create our constructor, public person BLL, and here let's instantiate this equal new data access layer dot person DAL. And now here what we should do is first let's use whatever we need, the namespaces, and now here we can say DAL dot get all persons, and we need to return this because the DAL this function is actually returning the list that we need. We also need to add the namespaces, and this as well. This is our data access layer class, and here we need to use system.link. The DAL is perfect. The business layer, just as we said, will be calling this DAL function and returning this. Now this might seem awkward. Why are we making 3 different functions? Why am I calling the business layer from the controller and then calling this one? Well, it would all make sense in a real application since we would have business rules. So for example, you might get this data. I'm gonna call it data for now. We might do some business logic here. We might filter it. We might map it. We might use it in another service. We might do a lot of things in it. Plus, in our business logic layer functions, we might call more than one data access function. So we might have here different functions that fetch different data from our database, and we might want to do something specific with them in our business logic. So it would make way more sense to separate them, and we would actually also be able to reuse them in other solutions if we ever need to. So far what we did, also let's delete this. So far also here we need to specify this again. Let's make sure that everything is working fine. No, we have an error. We need to delete this since we changed with the namespace here from .models to .entities, so you might have some errors, so be sure that everything is correct, that you're using the correct namespaces everywhere if you're facing any errors. And if you're sure that all the namespaces are correct, try to restart Visual Studio because sometimes it bugs out. Anyway, now let's try to run this. Let's try to get to send a GET request. Okay, everything is working fine. We have separated this function and it's working perfectly fine. I'm not gonna do the other ones for now because I want to explain some more things first, and then I'm gonna do the same for the other functions. The first thing that I want to show you is why we should use models instead of this entity, for example. So what I'm gonna do is go to the business logic layer project, right click and add a new folder. I'm gonna call it models, and inside of this one I'm gonna add a new class. I'm gonna call it person. Let's call it model just so we know the difference. Let's add this one, and as you might have guessed, we will need those properties here. So let's take them here and add them. Now obviously we need to remove those. We don't need the annotations here. Okay, so as you have realized, those two classes are similar. Yet you might be asking yourself, why on earth are we doing this? Why are we using person entity here, and why did you tell us that we should be using models in our business logic layer, and why should we return models here? So here we would have person model being returned instead of person. Of course, we're gonna fix that later. So why are you doing this? I'm gonna explain why. So to show you why, I'm gonna assume that we don't have this person model, and I'm not gonna use it, so ignore it. I'm gonna use this one, the entity, the one that we're already returning, the one that we've been proud of, the one that has been successful so far. So let's say we add this annotation. So what this does is, if you're not familiar with regular expressions, we basically give a certain rule that should be respected, a certain format that should be followed, and if the format is not followed, we're gonna show this message, which is invalid data type. So since this annotation is on top of first name, now whenever we try to create a person with a first name that does not respect this regular expression right here, this format right here, then it should show me this error and should not let me continue. So to prove that to you, let's run this. Let's see what's wrong. Okay, here we have this extra curly braces. Let's run this and let's take a look here. If we remember, our post person takes a person. So if we take a look here, last time we have created this body. It takes a first name, the one that has regex in it. So basically the regular expression that I'm using here is only allowing characters without numbers, so it should not allow any number. If I try to insert a number, say this, press send, as you have seen, 400 status, bad request, one or more validation errors. If we take a look at the errors here, first name, invalid data type, which is the error message that we provided here. Well, this is working fine for now, but let's say we add a table in our database. Then we would need to update this here. We would need a new entity. Or let's say we didn't add a new table, but we added a new parameter here. Let's say we added, I don't know, phone number 2 or email. Okay? If we need to regenerate, we would need to regenerate our class here, and it would override this. So we would need to use the scaffold command again that we have used last time using the connection string to generate those from entity framework. So it would overwrite everything. So let's say here we had regular expressions, we had more annotations, there are a lot of annotations. It would all be overwritten and lost. we would have to rewrite it over and over again. So to save that, all we have to do is create a model, and then we add it to the model. Now whenever we try to add tables, make any other changes to our database and use the scaffold command again, okay, everything will be overwritten here, but we would not care about that because we don't have anything customized. However, here we have this. We wouldn't have to rewrite it again and again because the models will not be overwritten by Entity Framework. Here I need to use this namespace, and okay. So this is one of the main reasons you would need to use a model. Plus now we're separating this entity which is used by our data access layer from this model that is used in our business logic and in our controllers. One more reason why we would create this is, let's say we had relationships. Let's say we had, if you know database and relational databases, for example, we always think about relations 1 to n. If one person might have one to many visits, we would have a foreign key in visits table. Entity Framework is smart enough to come here and create a property which shows the relationship, but we don't really need to return that to the client. So if we call the API, we don't really care about the relationship itself if we're returning a person alone. We would not have this luxury if we're using this entity here, but we would have it all customized if we use a model. So this is why we're going to be using models. Plus we're going to use a package, the AutoMapper package, to map our entities to our models in one line of code. So we don't have to manually set the first name here, add the first name here, start manually giving each value to its correct model. You're gonna understand better when we install the package. I'm gonna go back to the controller, and now let's take that. Let's take all that function actually. Let's save it. Go back to our PersonBLL class in our data access layer project, where we said we should talk to the database and return the information. Here we don't care about this because, as we said, business logic should be in the business layer. That's why this should not be here. So let's remove that. And if we take a look at what we have left, we're getting an ID, and now we need to fetch the person. And this should not be called get all persons. I'm going to call it get person by ID, since that's what we're doing. Let's take this function just like we did before and add it here. And here, as we have done earlier, we need to use this DAL. So let's take that. We can say, for example, var data equal DAL.get person by ID, and we would pass in this ID. Now we can check if data equal null, for example. We can throw an exception, so throw new exception, invalid ID, for example, and then if it's not null, it's gonna return the data, which is the person. We can use more meaningful names, but you get the point. So here we have the business logic. Now this, it might not look very important to you, like it's not that big of a business logic now. We're just checking if we have a content or it's null, but trust me, in real applications we would have a lot of business rules and business logic, so it would be very good to separate it this way. The data access layer will be talking to the data source that we have, whether it's a database, an Excel file, or whatever, we don't really care, and it's going to return the data or add the data to the file, to the database, to MongoDB, to SQL Server Management, Microsoft. It doesn't matter, you get the point. And what we can do now is, in our controller, just like we did before, now I'm gonna fix this name, get person by ID, and just like we did before, here we're gonna return BLL.getPersonByID. Now some people don't really like using this in here, and it's okay. So if you don't want to have this part of the code, the data checking if it's null or if it returned data here, what you could have done is, here you return the data whether it's null or not, but then you would need to check that here. So for example, you would say first here you would return an action result. This is a class created by Microsoft, and here what we would do is, let's say var data, for example, equal this. Now we check if data equal null. What we can do is, for example, say return, what was it called, not found, no, not found, and we could say invalid ID, for example, and then here we could say return data, or actually return OK, and here we could pass in the data. And if you want to be more specific to which type of data should only be passed, we could say here person, and now here data is actually a person, so it's better if we call it person so that you don't get lost. Always keep a meaningful name. Now if we try to run this, if we try to call this API with an invalid ID that does not exist, if we try to send in the request, as you can see, invalid ID 404 not found. So you might find that some people like to add this data checking here, since we would have the luxury to use those functions created by Microsoft and use this ActionResult class. And some people like to keep it clean here and not use any business logic whatsoever and have them all in here. Yet, don't worry, you would still have plenty of business logic to do here in real life applications, but you get the point now. And that's how it's actually best to divide your project into 3 separate projects. By the way, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comment section and I'll try to answer everyone. So now what we're going to be doing is, let's go ahead and install the AutoMapper. We're going to install it in the business logic layer, since like we said, the business logic layer will handle the logic. So here, right click. We need to stop this first. Right click, manage NuGet packages. Let's browse for AutoMapper, and here we need to install it. By the way, look at how many people installed this. Everyone almost used it to transform entities to models. By the way, here you don't really need to worry about the version because it's compatible. Okay, now it's installed. So let's make sure that it's correctly installed. As you can see, AutoMapper. Now we need to use it in our PersonBLL.cs. So here I'm gonna say using AutoMapper. And now there are a few steps that we need to do to configure it and to create it. First thing first, let's create a new member for this function. It's going to be private. It's of type mapper, and let's call it PersonMapper. So we're going to use this mapper to map from person entity to person model and vice versa as well. And then here in our constructor, we need to create a configuration. So var say config person, for example, equal new mapper configuration. And then here we're going to use the arrow function. We're going to say create map, and we need to specify the 2 types, so source and destination. So person and person model, and if you look here, person model is this one, person is the one in data access layer, but we can reference it because we already added the project reference at the beginning. Don't forget about that, that's really important. And then we have, first let's add the namespace using models. Okay, this is the correct one. And then we need to add this reverse map function as well. because this way now we can convert from model to entity and from entity to model. It works both sides. It's bidirectional now. Let's see it in use. But first, let's not forget, we need to add one more thing in our constructor. Now we have created the mapper, we have created the configuration. Now we need to assign this configuration to this mapper. To do that, we need to say PersonMapper equal new mapper, so we instantiated it, and we need to pass in the person configuration, which is config person. Now let's see it in use. As we have said, in the business logic layer, we need to be using models and not entities. So here it should be PersonModel now, and here it should be PersonModel as well. Now it's not working because in our controller, we're still using entities. It should be models instead. So here PersonModel, and here PersonModel. And of course we need to add the namespaces. This should be public, that's why we could not find it. Now if we go back here, Alt Enter, we were able to find it. So now what we return to the client, whether it's an Angular application, a vanilla JavaScript application, React.js, anything, it doesn't matter. It would return the model that we have here, the one that we can customize, and the one that will not be overwritten whenever we change data here, and whenever we use the scaffold method that will overwrite everything here, because this will stay intact, it will not be touched, you will not have to rewrite this code again, and this is going to be the model that's going to basically be used everywhere, except in the data access layer, just like we said. I know I keep repeating the same thing, but just so that you can memorize that. Now here we have an error because this does not return a person model, it returns a person. We need to make the mapping. So for example, here I'm gonna say person entity just so that you can see the difference. This is the person entity, but if we take a look, this is returning person model. So is the API here. It's returning an action result of person model, not person. So we need to use the mapper that we have created. Now let's create a person model. Let's call it person model equal. Now we need to use the mapper to map. So person mapper that we have created and configured dot map, and we need to specify that we're mapping from person to person model, and we pass in whatever the source is. The source is this entity that's going to be transformed into a person model. Now we can return this as person model, and this is working fine, and the controller would not be whining anymore. Let's go back to this one. This is a good example because here we're mapping a list, so I want to show you that we can actually use lists as well. So here if I say person, since a list is a list of person, I'm gonna say persons from DB, just so you know the difference. This is the entity auto-generated, and now I'm gonna create the model list. So list person model, I'm gonna call it persons model equal. Now we need to use the mapper again. I'm gonna copy this, paste it here, change the source to this one that we get here, and here we can use lists as well. So this mapper is actually very good to use. It supports list. As you can see, now we need to return this list right here. So return persons model. Let's run this. Postman, send. As you can see, it's working. Let's try to get by ID 1, send. We don't have ID 1. 3. Okay, let's try 3. Send. It's working fine, but this time we're using 3 different layers, 3 different projects. Each layer is doing its own thing. This one accessing the database, retrieving the data. This one acting upon that data, mapping it, having any business rule, and the controller calling it, returning it, calling the function and returning it. You could also handle small stuff like this, but some people don't really like to use it that way. They would prefer to create exceptions here and handle them later. I don't think it matters that much, honestly. Maybe it's a personal preference. Let's do the post API, and I think it will be enough for this video. So here we already know we don't really need to have that here. Let's remove it, let's copy it, go to data access layer, and we need to have it here. Of course it's not gonna get this here. For example, it should get a person. It should not get a person model, because this is the data access layer. It should not depend on the business logic layer. It should not depend on any class that is contained in this business logic layer. It should only depend on stuff that are created and contained in this project data access layer. And that's why we're going to be using the normal person. Plus, this is the person that is used in DB context that was auto-generated by entity framework, so it would not know anything else. It would not understand what a person model is, so we would be obliged to use this one either way. So here we need to add this one, so we would add it here. This is it for this function, for the DAL, done. Let's take that, come to business logic layer. Did not copy. Copy it again, go back to here. Okay, now here what we need to do, here for example it's the business logic layer. We're gonna receive a person model from the body here, because we use models, and we need to call the DAL. You already know that, we have seen it earlier, dot post person. But if we realize we need to pass in a person and not a person model, so we need to automap this. So let's do that right now. So here I'm gonna create a person P instance. I'm gonna call it person entity, just so you remember, equal, let's use the mapper. So PersonMapper dot map. We need to map from person model this time to person, and the source is person model. So the instance that we are receiving as parameter for our function. And now we can call in the data access layer function and pass the person entity here. Now it can accept it, because it's no longer a person model. We have a person now. It's a new instance, it's another one. And in our controller here, we also need to make the changes. So we call the business logic layer. And as we already said, here we need to pass in the person model, which is gonna come from the body. Person model, let's say person model. We take this, we pass it here, semicolon. Now if we run this, and remember we have this regular expression here. By the way, in real applications you would have more. So for a phone number, if you have a specific format, you would add one, fix the regular expression, show data, show an error message. For emails, for example, you need to add one as well, so that the user or the API would not accept a wrong format. It would find that this, for example, this property cannot afford or cannot have a value that does not respect this. So it would throw an error and not continue and not proceed. So now if you go back to Postman, post API, if we try to run this one, which does not respect the format, we're gonna get invalid data type. If we respect it and we only use characters, it will work. To be sure that it will work, remember it's test get, scroll all the way down, test. This is the one that we just created. I think it's enough for this video. We have finished this series. Actually, you have learned how to create APIs, how to use entity framework, database first approach, how to divide your project, your solution into 3 different projects that each one does its own thing. Now there are more patterns, more different ways to divide your project: infrastructure, domain layer. There are a lot of ways to do it, but it's always one thing, one important goal, which is to have separation of concern and to have the projects be reusable. Thank you so much. If you're still watching, it means that you enjoyed the video, you found it helpful. Please leave a like and subscribe if it helped you. It would really mean a lot. Thank you for watching. If you have any suggestions, please leave a comment and I'll look into it. Thank you and see you next time.